I don't think you can paint the entire social media with one brush of disinformation, fake news. Yes, there's a lot of that. But there is also a lot of truth there that the mainstream media is constrained, or perhaps because of commercial interests, are not really talking about. I really think that the government should seriously reconsider its approach to social media. And also, you see, I think that those in power have also not, in-depth understanding of the medium. They are really, it's like knee-jerk reactions. People were circulating images from Palestine, claiming that it was from Islamabad, the bodies of Palestinians wrapped in like coffins. They were claiming that these are PTI workers. Most of the time, the government's obsession has been with political news. And they have news concerning either the civilian government or the military. But I think in the long term, control of social media really is a losing battle.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the DigiPod. I am Faria Aziz. Today I am joined by Zora Yusuf, who is a former chairperson of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. Thank you for making time for DawnNews English. Today we're discussing in the aftermath of what happened in Islamabad and also Matiullah Jan's abduction and arrest, a lot of debate around credible journalism versus what vloggers or vloggers, however you want to pronounce it, their brand of journalism and demonization of social media. How do you see this? I mean, this debate is reignited every now and then, and this bifurcation or distinction is made between mainstream credible journalism versus what we see on social media, as if disinformation is an exclusively social media issue.
All right. You see, I don't think you can paint the entire social media with one brush of disinformation, fake news. Yes, there's a lot of that. But there is also a lot of truth there that the mainstream media is constrained, or perhaps because of commercial interests, are not really talking about. So there are many issues that we actually know about only through the social media, issues and incidents of violence or rights violations. So that should also be acknowledged. It's not like, you can't paint it all black or all white. And it's certainly, a more difficult medium or platform to control. Regardless of the controls being brought in, I think people do find a way out, and I hope they continue to.
You recently wrote an article also about there's this fear of social media. And is it also, do you feel, related to this lack of control that social media has not, or at least the establishment has not been able to control social media to the degree or other vested interests that they are able to control, mainstream media, especially television or even print?
Absolutely. You see, it's like, I think for the government, and not just here, many countries, it's like a monster, a hydra, headed monster. They strike one down and another appears. And the platform for dissent, or the opportunity for dissent and for flouting government rules or controls, is greater on social media than on mainstream. Mainstream also because, it's, let's say, more focused. There are, let's say, an X number of channels that the government can attempt to control, and they do, or an X number of newspapers. But when it comes to social media, there are just so many users using so many platforms with so many followers that it's practically an impossible task. And I really think that the government should seriously reconsider its approach to social media. And also, you see, I think that those in power have also not, in-depth understanding of the medium. And they are really, it's like knee-jerk reactions. They see posts that criticize, perhaps the army chief or the party in power, and they react strongly. Or yes, there is a lot of fake news also. If you see, take the recent case of the PTI demonstrations. And yes, there was certainly, violence against them, against the demonstrators. You can't deny that. And there was violence perpetrated by the demonstrators. Even, that was caught on camera. The thing is that, people's right to know is violated when there's a clampdown. And its manifestation, of course, one manifestation was the arrest of Matiullah Jan in such a clearly fake case. And it shows the government's nervousness, and it's acting just like every other government has in the past. And you will recall that I believe in 2020, perhaps, when the PTI was in power, they picked up Matiullah Jan as well. He was made to disappear. So I guess he's one of those who's a pawn in every government side.
And this is usually the response through extra legal measures. So, one of the critiques that is leveled against social media or the use of social media or, what the narratives that are put out is that there is no editorial check versus the mainstream. Now, you've been an editor as well. And what is that fine line between editorial check but gatekeeping and then censorship?
You see, I don't think, because on social media, they're individual users. For example, if DawnNews is using social media, yes, there would be and there can be editorial checks. But if an individual posts something, what do you expect? Perhaps, I know Facebook and all these platforms, they do claim to have some checks. To what extent they apply those or they don't, but it's really not possible to censor at that individual level. And yes, as I said, there is a lot of propaganda. People were circulating images from Palestine, claiming that it was from Islamabad, the bodies of Palestinians wrapped in, like coffins. They were claiming that these are PTI workers. So yes, there is a lot of disinformation, and there should be some means to counter that, perhaps a counter narrative, an equally strong counter narrative, but clamping down, universally is really not the solution.
And some of this we've seen emerge in the days that followed, fact checks of images and
Yes,
of
yes,
numbers, etc. And that is typically what does happen. And in fact, a lot of, for example, Matiullah Jan, Sakapashi were at PIMS trying to verify the
mm,
numbers
yes,
and corroborate between two sides. So there is that fact checking happening in real time. Obviously, it's a developing story. I also
yes,
want to ask you, there seems to be this now obviously hostility and also the mainstream's taking it upon itself, or those within the so-called mainstream, to label who is a journalist, who is not a journalist. Now, this also has persisted through as the mediums have changed, where print journalists used to think that with the advent of electronic media, that, but electronic media anchors were not really journalists. And now the electronic media thinks that those who are on the digital media are not really journalists. How do you see this sort of labeling divide?
I think, that these labels, they're not really living up to changing times. The times are changing very fast, the dynamics are changing. And I don't think, anyone now has the right to label somebody as a non-journalist or as a journalist. I think these are very, let's say, old concepts. And yes, we certainly need professionalism, and the system of using fact checks. I think that's very good, and it should be, used more often, because there's all the let's say fake news spreading, and obviously there are repercussions. But when it comes to journalism, and I think if somebody is actually investigating a story, doing it objectively, truthfully to the extent possible, whether it's for social media, print, electronic. I think that person deserves to be recognized as a journalist. But obviously, somebody who is totally out on a propaganda mission for any political party or group and is just, posting blogs or whatever, very clearly influenced by that party's thinking or interests, then yes, that would not really be professional journalism.
One could argue that, of course, with the change of medium, the virality, the impact, of course, in real time may be different. But in terms of propaganda or towing a particular kind of line, this also, would you say, predates social media? And it did happen when there were other forms, whether it was pamphlets, eveningers, print media, even with electronic, that all of this has existed and it's not a social media invention.
Yes, I would agree with you there. You see, earlier, well, whether it was print journalism or electronic, I mean, we had only one channel that was government owned, Pakistan Television at one time, before the private channels came in. But, most of the time, the government's obsession has been with political news. And they have news concerning either the civilian government or the military. They have not really been concerned about individual citizens being defamed or, like these eveningers that you mentioned, they would sell on scandals. They would take up a story of perhaps a murder or somebody involving either a well-known name or an actress or something, and just create headline after headline, and they would sell on that basis. But no one in authority, and we've always had censorship in the form of press information departments, etc. But they were never concerned about individual citizens. It's always been the state and its institutions.
And it seems as though, would you say that that sort of has carried over where social media is concerned, where the lawmaking, and especially with respect to the cybercrime law, and when you were at HRCP actively involved when the cybercrime law was being brought as well, right? And the narrative was that it was for citizen protection, but we've seen what it's actually been used, and it's again sort of what you say about the state or an institution. And while it's argued that social media is unregulated, we've seen that criminal liabilities and criminal cases have been constructed against journalists. Is this not another way of censorship or chilling speech?
Absolutely, absolutely. They're responding to the medium, that's coming up, and according to the nature of the medium, they're reacting. But I really think that in the long term, it's a losing battle, and the sooner the government realizes it, and yes, perhaps things like fact checks, etc. I mean, I know they can't be imposed, but perhaps, self-regulation on that basis can be encouraged. But I think in the long term, control of social media really is a losing battle. So there's a lot of rethink involved, and I think consultation with, people like you and others who have greater knowledge of the medium. I know there were consultations during the PMLN government when they were introducing the site, but very little of it was actually incorporated in the law, and we've seen that its application is far from satisfactory. The FIA clearly says we don't have the capacity to handle all these individual cases. The response is extremely poor to individual complaints, but when it comes down to shutting down something on the government's instructions, it's done immediately.
Since you mentioned regulation, there have been several attempts to regulate social media beyond just the cybercrime law. Also come up with a licensing scheme similar to the Pembra model and create it for the internet. Now, print was never subjected to that kind of regulation the way electronic media, and social media is distinct from electronic media, but it appears as though they want to adopt the Pembra model for social media. How do you see this playing out, these attempts, and whether it's viable?
Right. Actually, just to correct you there, at one time, the print media too had to be registered. And I think, with the deputy commissioner or the commissioner's office or something, I don't quite recall. But yes, they all had to register, get a license to, publish. And I think that was perhaps done away during the first PPP government, if I'm not mistaken, when Benazir came into power, or perhaps later. But yes, that practice was there. And that too used to hang over the print media that, you can take away your permission to publish. Uh, but yes, since then, also because, the power of the print media is perhaps declining in terms of circulation, in terms of access, even in terms of people's ability to read. So, or just laziness or whatever. So perhaps the focus now is much more on the electronic media and the new beast that has sort of entered the fray, social media, which the government is still not has not completely understood, has blinkers on, and they think that you just sort of like a fly, you swat it and it will go away, but it won't.
No, it won't. And just rounding off the conversation as we come to the end, of course, I mean, the government or the state has a particular view, but we also see different sections of society and the media or other journalists who also have this sort of very hostile view of social media, even though they do use it now a lot more, but
Yes.
they still have this very us and them approach. How would you say they going forward address this, or what should be their response now?
I think let's say, senior journalists or the more established institutions, instead of criticizing the social media or playing an adversarial role, they could play a more responsible role in the sense that, they can set the parameters because they've been in the business for a long time. They've dealt with censorship, and some of the media organizations, they have a level of credibility, and so perhaps using their own experience in dealing with censorship and dealing with what is defamatory and what is not, perhaps they can set or help set some self-regulatory principles for the social media. But I think that is old thinking to, assert that they're not really journalists and we are the like true blue-blooded journalists. I think that time has gone. And, I mean, a lot of people are now in the business of news, some factual, some not. But yes, I mean, even many not associated with any mainstream media organization, they're doing a remarkable job of bringing issues to people, of discussions, etc. So I think, you must consider them journalists as well.
Absolutely. And the Human Rights Council's jurisprudence under the ICCPR now also recognizes that it's not a cadre of professionals, but the journalistic function
Yes.
of the information that they bring in public interest. That is what defines journalism. And that is the function that a lot of the vloggers are doing, especially when there is censorship in the mainstream. Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for joining us today.
Thank you, Faria. Nice talking to you.